This house will be mine eventually anyway, so you don't mind, right? When my only daughter said this, I thought she was just excited. She wanted my home, the one I built for her late mother, as the backdrop for her lavish engagement party. I said yes. Little did I know, this was the first move in a calculated takeover orchestrated by her greedy fiancé. They saw me as a relic, an old man to be pushed aside. But they underestimated me. In front of all their wealthy friends, my revenge wasn't loud. It was just 3 documents. You can't imagine the silence that followed. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. I am 68 years old this year, a retired civil engineer, and for the last 10 years, a widower. My life, much like that of any other old man, drifts by in an almost absolute stillness. It isn't the terrifying silence of loneliness, but rather a gentle symphony of habit and memory. Every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, I wake. I don't need an alarm. My body has long since synced to this rhythm. The first thing I do is brew a pot of Earl Grey, the very tea Eleanor, my late wife, so dearly loved. The faint scent of bergamot lingering in the morning air always makes me feel as if she's still somewhere nearby. I take my cup to the old, worn leather armchair by the large window in the living room, the one with a commanding view of the front garden. This is my unshakable ritual. I sit there, taking slow sips of hot tea, and gaze upon my brainchild. This villa is more than just a structure. It's the legacy of a lifetime. I drew the blueprints with my own hands, supervised the laying of every brick, the setting of every beam. Every corner is soaked in my sweat, my devotion, and the shared memories of my wife and I. We chose the paint for the walls together, planted the rose bush in the corner of the garden together, watched it grow day by day. To me, it is more than a house. It is a part of my flesh and blood, a testament to a life of labor and love. In the 10 years since Eleanor passed, the stillness has only deepened. Sometimes I find myself talking to her. "Look, Eleanor, the climbing rose is so beautiful this year," I'll whisper to the empty space beside me. Or, "The tea is a bit weak today. I must not have used enough leaves." In those moments, I can almost feel her smiling. That gentle smile I will never forget. This house, in its quietude, has become the safest sanctuary for my aging soul. I have only one child, a daughter, Melissa. She's 32. When she was little, she was my tiny shadow, toddling after me at construction sites, a toy hard hat on her head, babbling a universe of questions. She used to say that when she grew up, she would be an engineer like her father, to build beautiful houses. She loved this house more than anything, giving each room a playful name and claiming the garden as her own private kingdom. That's how close we once were. But then she grew up. New friends appeared, along with parties and expensive designer goods. Melissa's world began to change. She was swept into a vortex of ambition and wealth. A world where a person's worth was measured by the assets they owned and the connections they had. The distance between us grew, not in miles, but in something invisible called status. It became all the more apparent when Melissa met David. He was a young entrepreneur, slick, polished, and a braggart. David drove expensive sports cars, wore bespoke suits, and talked endlessly of million-dollar deals. In Melissa's eyes, David was the embodiment of success. And from that point on, in her eyes, I slowly became an old man who was old-fashioned and poor. She no longer had any interest in hearing me talk about the structure of a bridge or the durability of a certain material. Instead, she spoke of stock prices, grand openings, and lavish vacations. Sometimes I'd catch her impatient glances when I was lost in an old memory. She no longer valued the principles I'd spent a lifetime building. To Melissa and her new world, a retired old engineer living in a self-built house in the suburbs was nothing to be proud of. The pain of it smoldered inside me, but I never once blamed her. I just told myself it was the way of the world. One Sunday afternoon, Melissa and David came to visit. David, as usual, walked a lap around the house, making a few comments about the slightly dated but classic architectural style. I just offered a tight-lipped smile. After some small talk, Melissa got straight to the point. Her voice hesitated for a moment, but it was still laced with a confidence honed by social functions. "Dad," she began, "David and we've decided to get engaged." My heart tightened, but it was a pang of joy. I took her hand. "Is that so? That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." David smiled triumphantly. Melissa continued, and here was the true purpose of their visit. "Yes, we're planning an engagement party. A lot of David's important friends and business partners will be there. We want to have the party here, at our villa." She paused, looking me straight in the eye, and then said something that made me freeze. "This house, it'll be mine eventually anyway, so you don't mind, right?" The words slipped out so naturally, as if it were an indisputable fact. I was momentarily stunned. My throat went dry. For a second, I wanted to ask her what she meant by ours, and why she felt she had the right to make such a decision. But then I saw the eager, expectant look in her eyes. I saw David standing with his arms crossed, nodding in approval. I didn't want my only daughter's special day to begin with a tense argument. Perhaps I was being too sensitive. Perhaps she just said it casually. I stifled a sigh and forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Make yourselves at home. My house is your house. I thought it was just a party. But I was wrong. It was the opening shot." Melissa's misconception didn't spring from nowhere. It was cultivated from small pieces, from careless words and misinterpreted documents. First, there was my promise. Years ago, when Melissa was in high school, she was upset that her friends were all showing off their big houses. To comfort her, I had pulled her into a hug and said, "Don't you worry, sweetheart. This house is my life's work. Later when I'm gone, it will all be yours." It was a promise born of love, a promise about the future, about legacy. But in Melissa's mind now, the word later seemed to have been erased. Next was a coincidence. While cleaning out my study to prepare for the party, Melissa found the trust documents I had drawn up with my lawyer. She skimmed them and stopped at the section for successor trustee, where her name was listed. With her superficial legal knowledge, she interpreted it in a way that suited her. She believed the title meant she was already a co-owner, just waiting to take over. Things went even further when David's lawyer sent me a draft of a quitclaim deed. It's a common legal procedure to transfer property without a sale. David wanted me to sign it to simplify things later on. I reviewed the draft, found it presumptuous and premature, and put it in a drawer without another word. I never signed it. But Melissa, likely informed by David, acted as if it were a done deal. I overheard her on the phone with a friend, boasting, "The paperwork is almost done. It's just a formality." Finally, to make organizing the event easier, Melissa suggested putting the repair, insurance, and HOA bills in her name. "It'll be more convenient for me to pay the vendors directly, Dad." "I'll use David's card," I agreed without much thought. To me, it was a temporary arrangement. But to Melissa, every bill that arrived addressed to Melissa Collins was another piece of evidence reinforcing her belief that the house was, in fact, hers. Bit by bit, her misconception grew, hardening into a firm conviction. She began to walk around the house with the air of a proprietress. She changed a few pieces of furniture on her own whim, decided to repaint a wall without consulting me. Each time I felt a prickle of wrongness, but I told myself to be patient. I thought that once the party was over, everything would go back to normal. I had no idea the storm was only just beginning. On the day of the party, my house was no longer my own. From early morning, a team of event planners swarmed in, turning the familiar, quiet space into a bustling, chaotic film set. They ran thick black cables across my polished wooden floors, set up tables draped in crisp white linen, and arranged enormous vases of lilies whose cloying funereal fragrance overpowered the comforting scent of my Earl Grey. Eleanor would have hated these flowers. She always said their smell was too strong, too ostentatious, a scent for strangers, not for a home. I retreated to my study, closing the heavy oak door to preserve one last corner of tranquility for myself. But the sounds of preparation still bled through. The incessant chatter and forced laughter, the clinking of glasses, the coordinator's loud, sharp directives. I felt like an uninvited guest, a ghost haunting the periphery of my own life. By early evening, as the first guests arrived, I truly understood the scale of the event. A procession of luxury cars snaked up the driveway, their headlights cutting through the dusk like searchlights. Men in elegant tailored suits and women in glittering evening gowns and heavy, expensive jewelry stepped onto the lawn that Eleanor and I had cultivated with our own hands, now illuminated by hundreds of twinkling fairy lights. They surveyed everything with the cool, appraising eyes of investors sizing up a new acquisition. At the entrance to the garden, a large banner was stretched between two posts. Gilded letters shimmered on a white silk background. "Welcome to our home." Our home. The two words struck me, stinging like a needle to the heart. Not the home of Melissa and David, not a generic welcome. It was a declaration of ownership, a brazen public statement put on display for all to see. Melissa, in a champagne-colored dress that shimmered under the lights, was stunning and radiant. She and David stood at the door, hand in hand, greeting guests as the true hosts of the party. Her smile was brilliant, professionally so, but I no longer recognized my daughter. The little girl with the clear, bright eyes and the genuine laugh had vanished, replaced by a strange woman playing a perfect role in a drama of wealth, a drama she and her fiancé had written themselves. I wore an old but decent suit, trying to blend into the crowd, but I was just a lost ghost in a sea of glittering strangers. No one recognized me, or perhaps they couldn't be bothered to notice an old man standing quietly in a corner. I held a glass of water and found a chair tucked behind the climbing rosebush, and I sat there, observing. I watched my house, my brainchild, being used as a gaudy backdrop for someone else's vanity. Every laugh, every impressed murmur from the guests about the young couple's good fortune felt like a knife twisting slowly in my pride. I sat there long enough to catch snippets of conversation drifting on the evening air. They revolved around David's business ventures, some couple's upcoming vacation to Monaco, and, of course, this house. A group of David's friends stood not far from me. A man with slicked back hair spoke in a tone of raw admiration. "You have to admit, Melissa is one lucky woman. Beautiful. And she inherits a fortune like this. This villa in this location must be worth a king's ransom." Another woman nodded, her diamond earrings catching the light. "The location is perfect. I heard David is planning to use it as collateral for a bigger real estate project." "He's brilliant." David, who had just walked over with Melissa on his arm, overheard and laughed loudly. There was something smug, something deeply condescending in his laugh. "That's right," he said, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "a calculated performance. It's all just a formality at this point. After the wedding, we'll officially have our names on everything. The paperwork is practically finished." My heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I glanced at Melissa, desperately waiting for a correction, a shake of her head, at least an embarrassed smile to signal this was just bravado. But there was nothing. She just stood there, smiling and giving a slight, complicit nod, as if David's words were an undeniable truth. That nod, as subtle as it was, carried the weight of 1,000 pounds, crushing my last flicker of hope. She had chosen their side completely. She had chosen that glittering, hollow world and was willing to embrace a lie to secure her place in it. I swallowed hard against a rising bitterness. Anger began to simmer in my chest. It wasn't just anger, but a bitter, stinging disappointment that burned hotter than any rage. I had built this house on honesty and hard work, and now it was about to be seized by lies and greed. I wanted to stand up, walk over there, and tell everyone the truth. But I didn't. This was my daughter's happy day. I couldn't ruin it. I had to be patient, I told myself, clinging to a discipline that was now being tested to its very limit. At least for now. When the party reached its peak, the MC invited Melissa and David onto a small, temporary stage set up in the corner of the garden. After some hollow praise, he announced that the families would say a few words. David's parents, a wealthy but cold-looking couple who regarded the world with an air of detached boredom, said a few brief words about the perfect union of their two families' assets and influence. Then, the MC looked in my direction. And now, we are honored to invite Mr. Richard Collins, father of the bride and the man who created this wonderful space, to the stage to share in their joy. A spotlight swung toward me, pinning me in its glare. All eyes turned to the chair hidden behind the rosebush. I took a deep, shaky breath, stood on legs that suddenly felt unsteady, and slowly made my way to the stage. I had a short speech prepared in my mind, a simple, fatherly blessing. I wouldn't say anything about the house, wouldn't mention any of the unpleasantness. I just wanted, as a father, to offer a blessing to my only child. I wanted to say that no matter what, I would always love her. I stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from the MC. I cleared my throat and looked down at Melissa. She was looking at me, but there was no warmth in her eyes, no love, only raw anxiety, bordering on panic. I began, my voice trembling slightly. I just want to wish my daughter. I didn't finish the sentence. In a flash, Melissa rushed forward, placed a cold hand on my arm, and leaned into the microphone. Dad, please sit down. Her voice was quiet but firm, and through the powerful sound system, it echoed across the entire silent garden. Today is about David and me. Let us talk to the guests. Her words were a bucket of ice water thrown in my face in the dead of winter. I stood there, stunned, frozen on the stage under the harsh spotlight. The entire garden fell silent. I could hear whispers starting to ripple through the crowd below, like the rustling of dry leaves. A few guests glanced at each other, then at me, with a look of pity mixed with cruel mockery. I could read their thoughts. A senile old man, out of touch, about to ruin his daughter's big day. Pain and humiliation rose like bile in my throat. I felt my face flush, a hot, shameful blush. But I didn't argue. I just gave a silent, stiff nod, handed back the microphone as if it were burning my hand, and stepped down from the stage. I walked back to my old chair, fighting to keep my expression neutral. But inside, my heart was shattering into a million pieces. My daughter, the daughter I loved with all my being, had just publicly rejected and shamed me in front of hundreds of people. It didn't end there. After I sat down, David stepped forward and took the microphone. He wrapped a possessive arm around Melissa's waist and smiled at the crowd, the picture of magnanimity. "Thank you, everyone, for celebrating with us," he began, his voice dripping with false confidence. "As you can see, we are standing in a magnificent home. A home that bears the mark of a previous generation." He paused, flicking a quick, dismissive glance in my direction before continuing. "But times have changed. We, the new generation, with our new vision, promise to manage and develop this place to even greater heights." He raised his glass. "And don't you worry," he added, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "We won't abandon the old guard. Old Richard will have a cozy little room in the back to rest in his old age." A burst of sycophantic laughter erupted from David's circle of friends. A few others joined in, uncertainly at first, then with more gusto. They took it as a witty joke from a charismatic young man. But to me, it was an undisguised public insult. He was announcing to the world that I was nothing more than a freeloader. a piece of old furniture about to be shoved into a corner of my own house. I sat perfectly still, my hands clenched into tight fists in my lap, my knuckles white. Just then, Melissa left the stage and walked toward me. For one foolish, desperate moment, I held onto a hope that she was coming to apologize. But she wasn't. She leaned down, her expensive perfume assaulting my senses, and whispered in my ear, her voice cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "Can you please stop making a scene? If you're not comfortable, you can leave. This is my house now. This is my house now." Those words, uttered from my own daughter's lips, hurt more than 1,000 of David's insults. It was the final cut, slicing deep into the bleeding wound in my heart. In that instant, everything was crystal clear. There was nothing left to hope for, nothing left to hold on to. The bond between father and daughter, the sweet memories of a little girl in a toy hard hat. All of it was buried under a landslide of greed and vanity. I didn't answer Melissa. I just quietly stood up without looking at her and walked straight into the house. I didn't head for my bedroom. I went to my study, my final sanctuary, my command center. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The music and laughter outside seemed to belong to another world, another lifetime. Here, there was only the familiar, comforting silence and the smell of old paper and leather. I switched on my green-shaded desk lamp, its soft, steady light having seen me through countless nights of work and worry. I pulled my old leather briefcase out from under the desk. This briefcase, a gift from Eleanor, had been with me through the final years of my career. I placed it on the desk, my aging fingers, which had once been so steady, now trembling as I undid the worn brass latches. Inside, there were no blueprints or construction documents. Inside were 3 things: my trinity of truth. First, the deed to the house, notarized and stamped with a red seal. On it, the words, "Owner Richard Collins," were printed clearly, irrefutably, a testament to a lifetime of labor. Second, the unsigned draft of the quitclaim deed that David's lawyer had sent. It was still pristine in its envelope, a monument to their audacity, and most importantly, it bore no signature of mine, a symbol of my silent defiance. Third, a printout of an email from the bank David and Melissa had used to apply for their loan. I had received it by chance, as my email was still linked to a few notifications regarding the property. I had read it very carefully, my old engineer's eyes scanning for the critical flaw. The most important line I had highlighted in yellow: conditional pre-approval. And what was the condition? The loan will only be executed upon the legal transfer of the property's title to Mr. David Prescott and Ms. Melissa Collins. The keystone of their entire crumbling facade. That had never happened. I arranged the 3 documents neatly on my desk, under the green light, like a general laying out his battle plans. I looked at them, then looked out the window toward the noisy, glittering party. They could have their expensive clothes, their flashy connections, their well-rehearsed lies. I had the truth. I let out a long, slow breath, not of weariness, but of cold, hard resolve. The game had gone too far. It was time to bring down the curtain on their little play. It was time to teach them a lesson about the difference between a promise and a property title, between delusion and reality. Sitting in my study, I heard the music outside fade, replaced by the booming voice of the MC. His every word, sharp as a razor, sliced through the wooden door. I didn't need to see it to imagine the scene. Melissa and David on stage, hand in hand, heads held high under the dazzling lights, accepting accolades like a newly crowned king and queen. My daughter's face must have been glowing with pride, her smile enchanting everyone. I heard the empty platitudes about a perfect couple, a match made in heaven. I heard the crisp clinking of champagne glasses. And then, the moment I had been waiting for, the decisive moment, arrived. The MC cleared his throat, adopting a solemn, resonant tone as if proclaiming a royal decree. And now, without further ado, please give a huge round of applause to congratulate our beautiful and talented couple, the new owners of this magnificent villa. A small pop, the sound of a confetti cannon. It was followed by a thunderous ovation, mixed with whistles and cheers. The sound crashed against my study door, against my ribcage. The new owners. Those 3 words, spoken so publicly and ceremoniously, were no longer a misconception or a whisper. They were a declaration. And that was my cue. It was time. I rose slowly to my feet. The trembling in my hands from earlier had vanished, replaced by an unfamiliar steadfastness, as solid as the reinforced concrete I had spent a lifetime pouring. I felt the familiar fit of my old suit on my shoulders, a trusted companion. I took the file from my desk, tucking it neatly under my arm. The old leather briefcase remained under the desk. Its role was over. Now there was only the naked truth, contained within this thin paper folder. I unlocked the door, turned the cold brass knob, and stepped out. The light and noise of the party hit me like a wave, but I no longer felt lost or overwhelmed. Everything seemed to slow down. Under the golden lights, I saw smiling faces, clapping hands, raised glasses. They were all celebrating a lie, a meticulously staged play. I started to walk, step by deliberate step, slowly, unhurriedly, but each footfall was heavy with resolve. I no longer clung to the walls like a shadow. I walked straight through the middle of the crowd, like an icebreaker cutting through the waves. A few people recognized me. Their expressions flickered from surprise to pity, probably thinking the old man was about to make a fool of himself on stage again. Others parted, making way for me as if by instinct, reacting to my heavy, pressurized silence. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. My target was the small stage in the corner of the garden where the lights converged, where Melissa and David stood, basking in their fraudulent glory. My daughter was smiling, a radiant smile, but when her eyes met mine, I saw it stiffen, a tiny ripple on a placid lake. David saw me too. He frowned, his annoyance unconcealed. Who did I think I was, daring to ruin his coronation? The applause faltered, then died completely as more people noticed my unusual presence. The silence spread like a wave. Heads turned to watch the old man in the old suit marching straight for the stage, uninvited. The MC looked flustered and started to move to intercept me, but something in my demeanor, the terrifying calm of a man with nothing left to lose, made him hesitate. I stepped up the last riser. The stage was small, just a temporary wooden platform, but in that moment, to me, it felt as big as the world. I walked directly to the small lectern where the MC usually stood. David and Melissa were only a few feet away. She looked at me, her eyes a mix of questioning and warning. "What are you doing?" Her gaze seemed to scream, "Don't embarrass me again." I didn't answer. I placed the file on the lectern. A dry thud echoed in the silence, loud enough for those nearby to hear. That small sound was like a starting gun, signaling the real drama was about to begin. Then I turned to face the crowd, the curious guests, and the couple who were beginning to feel a sense of dread. I didn't need a microphone. My voice, honed by decades of command on construction sites, was loud and clear enough to carry across the entire garden. "Good evening," I began calmly. "My name is Richard Collins, and I am Melissa's father." I paused, letting my introduction settle. I wanted them to know who I was, not as an old man in need of a small room, but as a person with a name, with standing. I'm standing here because I've heard many people, including the MC, refer to Melissa and David as the new owners of this house. I glanced at David. He was trying to appear calm, but his tightly pressed lips betrayed his tension. "I'm afraid I must disappoint you all, but there has been a slight misunderstanding." The legal owner of this house, as clearly stated on the paperwork, I emphasized each word, is still and only Richard Collins. To prove my point, I pulled the first sheet from the file. It was the deed of ownership. The paper was slightly yellowed with age, but the text and the official seal were still sharp. I held it up high, turning it slowly so everyone could see the notary's red seal and my signature. The stage light caught it, illuminating my name. This is the notarized deed of ownership. As you can see, the name on here is mine, not my daughter's, and not this young man David's. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd. They looked at each other, their faces etched with surprise. I put the deed down and pulled out the second paper, the draft of the quitclaim deed. I held it out toward David, whose face was starting to pale. "And this," I said, my voice unwavering, "is the draft of a quitclaim deed that David's lawyer sent me. A very professional document. There's just one small problem. It was never signed." I turned the paper over to show the empty signature line to the audience. A signature is a sacred thing. It represents consent, a legally binding promise. As you can see, this space remains empty, just as my consent was never given. Therefore, it is nothing more than a worthless piece of paper. The whispers grew louder. I could see a few people murmuring to each other, their eyes no longer filled with pity but with fascinated curiosity. The play had taken an unexpected turn. Finally, I picked up the third sheet, the bank email printout. I am also aware that the young couple used this house to apply for a substantial business loan. I looked directly at David, deep into his darting, evasive eyes. A very clever, very ambitious plan. But perhaps you were in too much of a hurry to read the fine print. I cleared my throat and read the highlighted line aloud, enunciating every word. Conditional pre-approval. The loan will only be executed upon the legal transfer of the property's title to the borrowers. I looked up, scanning the garden, letting my words sink in. As I have just demonstrated, that transfer never happened. That loan, much like the title of new owner, was built on a foundation that does not exist. A moment of stunned silence enveloped the garden, then erupted into a wave of chatter and discussion. No longer whispers, but audible comments. "My God, I can't believe it. So that's what this was. He was trying to take his future father-in-law's house? That David character is nothing but a fraud." I heard a few smattered claps, not loud, but decisive. Perhaps from those who had disliked David's arrogance from the start, or from older business people who understood the value of transparency. David, the center of attention, was now flushed crimson from his ears to his collar. His confidence had shattered into a million pieces. He stammered, trying to salvage the situation. This must be some kind of misunderstanding. "Sir, we can talk about this privately. This is a family matter." "A family matter?" I shot back, my voice like ice. "You made it everyone's matter when you claimed ownership in front of them." No one was listening to David anymore. He had lost all credibility in an instant. I turned to look at my daughter. Melissa stood frozen, like a statue. Her beautiful face was ashen, drained of all color. Her magnificent dress seemed to be swallowing her small, trembling frame. Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears, staring at me without blinking. The pride, the confidence, all gone. All that remained was panic, shame, and the raw pain of exposed truth. "Dad," she stammered, her voice trembling, broken. "Dad, you promised me. You promised." It was her final weapon. Emotion. Memory. A father's promise. Hearing those words, a sharp pain lanced through my heart. A part of me wanted to run to her, to hold her, to comfort her. But the other part knew I could not back down. This lesson, however painful, had to be learned. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice no longer holding the coldness of the law, but the quiet finality of a decision made, of an unshakable truth. Yes, I did promise, I said, my tone softening slightly but still firm. I promised you would have this house later. Later is a future built on respect, on love, not on deception and greed. But not today. The words "not today" were spoken with clarity, like a hammer driving the final nail into the coffin of their lies. Tears began to stream down Melissa's cheeks. She shook her head, unwilling to accept it, like a child having her favorite toy taken away. I couldn't bear to watch my daughter cry anymore. I turned, once again facing all the guests. They were silent, waiting to see how this drama would end. I wanted them, these people who lived in a world of contracts and promises, to understand the issue clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice ringing out one last time into the night. "I apologize for interrupting your party, but I believe there are some truths that must be made clear. The lesson tonight is a simple one, a lesson that perhaps many of us know but sometimes forget." I took a deep breath. There is a vast difference between a future promise, spoken with love, and legal ownership, written in black ink on white paper and sealed by the law. One belongs to the heart, the other to reason and legality. Never confuse the two. Please remember that. With that, I didn't wait for any reaction. I didn't want to hear another plea, another question, another excuse. I had said all that needed to be said. The rest, they could sort it out themselves in the ashes of their lies. I slowly turned my back and walked off the stage. I didn't glance at Melissa or David. I walked past where they stood, frozen, past the stunned crowd, and straight toward the front door. I could hear the steady rhythm of my own footsteps on the stone path. The entire party, the whole garden, which only minutes before had been a cacophony of celebration, was now utterly silent. The music had stopped. The laughter had stopped. All that was left was the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, as if whispering about a play that had just reached its tragic final curtain. A play with a costly lesson for those who had disrespected the truth. As I stepped out the front door and walked around to the gravel path on the side of the house, I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the chaotic scene behind me to know that the bomb I had just detonated had gone off. The crunch of my shoes on the gravel was the only sound I heard, a steady, solid rhythm carrying me away from the eye of the storm. But I could imagine it. I could picture the initial stunned silence being broken by whispers, then the chatter growing louder and louder, like a disturbed hive of bees. The play was over, and now it was time for the audience to review the actors. The things I heard recounted later were even worse than I had imagined. The guests, the very people who had been raising a glass to David just minutes before, were now his harshest judges. "Unbelievable, turns out he's nothing but a gold digger." A prominent real estate developer, a man David had been trying to court all evening, said to his companion. "He was planning to use this house as collateral for our joint venture. Thank God the old man exposed him when he did." "And Melissa is just as much to blame," a woman in a silk dress said, shaking her head dramatically. "What kind of daughter schemes with an outsider to cheat her own father? It's a disgrace to the family. The world they so desperately craved, the world of wealth and connections, had turned its back on them in the blink of an eye. The credibility that David had worked so hard to build with a flashy exterior and empty promises had evaporated into thin air. I knew that very night phone calls would be made. Potential partners would withdraw. Invitations would be rescinded. The door he thought he had kicked wide open would now be slammed shut in his face. And Melissa, my daughter. My heart ached when I thought of her, but that pain was no longer enough to sway my resolve. She had chosen to gamble her own dignity and that of her father for a place in that world. And now she had lost everything. The humiliation, the shame, would follow her for a long time. The friends she was so proud of, the ones who had flocked to her for the fortune they thought she was about to possess, would slowly drift away. She would become a cautionary tale, a piece of gossip in their circles. Our father-daughter relationship, which had been fractured for so long, was now likely shattered. Could it be repaired? I didn't know. The truth is a bitter medicine, and not everyone has the courage to swallow it and learn from it. The grand engagement party had turned into a tragicomedy. The guests made hasty departures, carrying with them the hot new story to tell. The luxury cars that had paraded in with such arrogance now departed in quiet embarrassment. The lavishly decorated garden now looked forlorn and absurd under the remaining lights. The "Welcome to our home" banner still hung there, a mocking epitaph to a young couple's shattered ambition. I took a walk around the garden, breathing in the clean night air. I passed the rose bushes Eleanor had loved, ran my hand along the stone walls I had chosen myself. This was my kingdom, and I had just reclaimed it. By the time I returned to the front, most of the guests were gone. Only a few lingered, probably out of morbid curiosity. I saw Melissa and David standing near the stage, no longer hand in hand. David was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair, muttering something, probably trying and failing to reach someone on his phone. Melissa had collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I walked past them. I didn't stop. I didn't say a word. David's eyes shot a look at me, full of hatred and resentment. Melissa must have sensed my presence. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, and in them was a mixture of blame, shame, and a faint, flickering plea. I held her gaze for only a second, a look devoid of anger, filled only with a deep, profound sadness. Then I continued on, into the house. My battle was over. The rest was the fallout, which they would have to bear on their own. The house was a mess. Glasses were scattered about, tablecloths were askew, and flower petals were trampled on the floor. But through the chaos, I could feel the stillness slowly returning. I didn't bother to clean. I went straight to my study, my sanctuary. I closed the door, and the noisy world outside completely vanished. Here, everything was still in order, just as it had always been. I turned on the green-shaded desk lamp, its familiar light enveloping me. My eyes fell on the photograph of Eleanor on my desk. She was smiling, that gentle, warm smile that had been the guiding star of my life. I picked up the frame, my thumb gently stroking the glass. "I did the right thing, didn't I, my love?" I whispered. I protected our home. I protected our family's honor. In the quiet of the room, I could almost hear her reply. A word of agreement, a sense of pride. I knew Eleanor would have understood. She was the one who had laid the first bricks with me, who had witnessed the sweat and devotion I poured into this place. She would never have allowed it to be desecrated by greed and deceit. A faint, relieved smile touched my lips. The burden I had been carrying for weeks seemed to lift. I placed the photo back in its spot and went to the small liquor cabinet in the corner. I took out a bottle of 18-year-old single malt scotch, a fine bottle I saved for special occasions. And this, without a doubt, was a special occasion. I poured a glass, the amber liquid glistening under the lamplight. I didn't drink it right away. I carried the glass to the window, sat down in my familiar leather armchair, and looked out. The party lights had mostly been extinguished. Only the street lights and the faint glimmer of the stars remained. My garden was slowly sinking back into its native darkness and peace. I took a sip of the whiskey. The fiery spirit spread through my throat, warm and strong. It was the taste of truth, the taste of victory. A quiet victory, with no cheers, but one that was immeasurably meaningful. I sat there for a long time, letting the stillness of the night wrap around me. The whiskey in my glass slowly disappeared. Out there, life went on. But in here, in this room, in my mind, time seemed to stand still, allowing me to reflect on all that had happened. I could have chosen another path. I could have remained silent, accepted their arrangement, and lived out the rest of my days as a freeloader in my own home, all for the sake of a false peace and the preservation of a father-daughter relationship that was already rotten from the inside. But I didn't. Because this house is not just brick and mortar. It is the symbol of my life's work, the keeper of my memories of my beloved wife, the legacy I want to leave behind. A legacy not just of material things, but of the values I have always held dear. Honesty, self-respect, and hard work. I didn't scream, I didn't curse, I didn't retaliate with malice. I didn't have to. My weapons were much simpler, yet infinitely more powerful. The truth and the law. When you have the truth on your side, you don't need to raise your voice. The truth speaks for itself. I thought about Melissa. The sadness returned. I love her. A father's love for his only child will never change. But I've come to realize that love does not mean condoning wrongdoing, and it certainly does not mean sacrificing your own principles to please someone else. Perhaps today's painful lesson will be her awakening. Perhaps one day, after she has tasted enough of life's ups and downs, she will understand what I did. Or perhaps not. Either way, I did what I knew was right. Honor cannot be bought with money. It cannot be built on boasts. It must be defended with integrity, with righteous action, even when that action comes at a great cost. I finished the last of my whiskey. Its subtle sweetness lingered on my tongue. I looked out the window toward the distant city lights. I no longer felt lonely. I had my memories. I had my principles. And I had this house. I had peace of mind. And that, in the end, is true wealth. If you found this story compelling, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear our next story, click on the box on the left of your screen. Thank you for watching.